Thought I'd add some mood lighting for today. Well, I'm about to read a quoted note, but I forget the context of this. But can you check the last one to find out? It's hard to keep track after a while. This is imitated by one Johnson, who put in for a public school in Shropshire, but was disappointed. He has an infirmity of the convulsive kind that attacks him sometimes so as to make him a sad spectacle, capital S on spectacle. Mr. P, from the merit of this work, which was all the knowledge he had of him, endeavored to serve him without his own application, and wrote to my Lord L.D. Gore, but he did not succeed. Mr. Johnson published afterwards another poem in Latin with notes, the whole very humorous, called The Norfolk Prophecy. P. I guess that's a note from Pope. End of note. Johnson had been told of this note, and Sir Joshua Reynolds informed him of the compliment which it contained, but from delicacy avoided shewing him the paper itself. When Sir Joshua observed to Johnson that he seemed very desirous to see Pope's note, he answered, "Who would not be proud to have such a man as Pope so solicitous in inquiring about him?" The infirmity into which Mr. Pope alludes appeared to me also, as I have elsewhere observed, such as in the Journal of the Tour of the Hebrides, plug, to be of the convulsive kind, and of the nature of this distemper called St. Vitus' dance. And in this opinion I am confirmed by the description which Singham gives of that disease. In quotes, "This disorder is a kind of convulsion. It manifests itself by halting or unsteadiness of one of the legs, which the patient draws after him like an idiot. If the hand are of the same side he applied to the breast or any other part of the body, he cannot keep it a moment in the same posture, but it will be drawn into a different one, by convulsion, notwithstanding all his efforts to do the contrary." Sir Joshua Reynolds, however, was of a different opinion, and favored me with the following paper. Quote, "Those motions or tricks of Dr. Johnson's are improperly called convulsions. He could sit motionless when he was told to do so, as well as any other man. My opinion is that it proceeded from a habit which he had indulged himself in of accompanying his thoughts with certain untoward actions, and those actions always appeared to me as if they were meant to reprobate some part of his past conduct. Whenever he was not engaged in conversation, such thoughts were sure to rush into his mind, and for this reason, any company, any employment whatever, he preferred to being alone. The great business of his life, he said, was to escape from himself. This disposition he considered as the disease of his mind, which nothing cured but company. One instance of his absence, and particularly as it is characteristic of the man, may be worth relating. Maybe. When he and I took a journey together into the West, we visited the late Mr. Banks of Dorsetshire. The conversation turned upon pictures which Johnson could not well see. He retired to a corner of the room, stretching out his right leg as far as he could reach before him, then bringing up his left leg and stretching his right still further on. The old gentleman observed him, went up to him, and in a very courteous manner assured him that though it was not a new house, the flooring was perfectly safe. The doctor started from his reverie like a person waked out of his sleep, but spoke not a word. End of quoted material. While we are on this subject, my readers may not be displeased with another anecdote communicated to me by the same friend from the relation of Mr. Hogarth. Johnson used to be a pretty frequent visitor to the house of Mr. Richardson, author of Clarissa. I've heard of him. And other novels of extensive reputation. Mr. Hogarth came one day to see Richardson soon after the execution of Dr. Cameron for having taken arms for the House of Stuart in 1745-1746. And being a warm partisan of George II, he observed to Richardson that certainly there must have been some very unfavorable circumstances lately discovered in this particular case, which had induced the king to approve an execution for rebellion so long after the time when it was committed, as this had the appearance of putting a man to death in cold blood, and was very unlike His Majesty's usual clemency. Footnote here. Impartial posterity may, perhaps, be as little inclined as Dr. Johnson was to justify the uncommon rigor exercised in the case of Dr. Archibald Cameron. He was an amiable and truly honest man, and his offense was owing to a generous, though mistaken, principle of duty. Being obliged, after 1746, to give up his profession as a physician and to go into foreign parts, he was honored with the rank of colonel, both in the French and Spanish service. He was the son of the ancient and respectable family of Cameron of Louchel, and his brother, who was the chief of that brave clan, distinguished himself by moderation and humanity, while the Highland army marched victorious through Scotland. It is remarkable of this chief that though he had earnestly remonstrated against the attempts as hopeless, he was of too heroic a spirit not to venture his life and fortune in the cause, when personally asked by him whom he thought his prince. In case you were curious about that. Anyway, back to the story at hand. While Johnson was talking, he perceived a person standing at a window in the room, shaking his head and rolling himself about in a strange, ridiculous manner. Now wait, is this Johnson or somebody else? No, okay, this is Mr. Hogarth visiting Richardson, and I suspect he's seeing Johnson right now in Richardson's house. Mr. Hogarth concluded that he was an idiot, whom his relations had put under the care of Mr. Richardson as a very good man. Shaking his head and rolling himself in a strange, ridiculous manner. To his great surprise, however, this figure stalked forward to where he and Mr. Richardson were sitting, and all at once took up the argument and burst out into an invective against George II, as one who, upon all occasions, was unrelating and barbarous, mentioning many instances, particularly that when an officer of high rank had been acquitted by a court-martial, George II had, with his own hand, struck his name off the list. In short, he displayed such a power of eloquence that Hogarth looked at him with astonishment, and actually imagined that this idiot had been at the moment inspired. Neither Hogarth nor Johnson were made known to each other at this interview. So that idiot was Johnson. Surprise. Moving on. 1740. Etat 31. In 1740, he wrote for the Gentleman's Magazine the Preface Life of Sir Francis Drake, and the first part of those of Admiral Drake and of Philip Berthier, both which he finished the following year. He also wrote an essay on epitaphs and an epitaph on Philip's a musician, which was afterwards published with some other pieces of his in Mrs. Williams's Miscellanies. This epitaph is so exquisitely beautiful that I remember even Lord Crane's, strangely prejudiced as he was against Dr. Johnson, was compelled to allow it very high praise. It has been ascribed to Mr. Garrick from its appearing at first with the signature of G, but I have heard Mr. Garrick declare that it was written by Dr. Johnson, and give the following account of the manner in which it was composed. Johnson and he were sitting together, when, amongst other things, Garrett repeated an epitaph upon the Phillips by a Dr. Wilkes in these words. Exalted soul, whose harmony could please the love-sick virgin and the gouty ease, could jarring discord like Amphion move to beauteous order and harmonious love. Move love? That does not rhyme. I'm sorry. Right here in peace, till angels bid thee rise, and meet thy blessed Savior in the skies. Now, how do you get moved to love to rhyme? Amphibian move, louvre, to a beauteous order and harmonious louvre. I don't know. I guess it sounded different back then. Johnson shook his head at these commonplace funeral lines and said to Garrick, "I think, Davy, I can make it better." Then, stirring about his tea for a little while in a state of meditation, he almost extempore produced the following verse. Phillips, whose touch harmonious could remove the pangs of guilty power or hapless love, Louvre, I guess. Right here, distressed by poverty no more, here mine the calm thou gavest so oft before. Sleep, undisturbed, within this peaceful shrine, till angels wake thee with a note like thine. At the same time that Mr. Garrick favored me with this anecdote, he repeated a very pointed epigram by Johnson on George II and Coley Kibler, which has never yet appeared and of which I know not the exact date. Dr. Johnson afterwards gave it to me himself. Augustus still survives in Marrow's strain, and Spenser's verse prolongs Eliza's reign. Great George's acts let tuneful Kibber sing, for nature formed the poet for the king. In 1741, he wrote for the Gentleman's Magazine the preface, conclusion of his life of Drake and Barrether, a free translation of the jests of Heracles with an introduction, and, I think, the following pieces. Debate on the proposal of Parliament by Cromwell to assume the title of king, abridged, methodized, and digested. Translation of Ab Goyan's dissertation on the Amazons. Translation of Frontenel's panegyric on Dr. Morin. Two notes upon this appear to be undoubtedly his. He, this year, and the two following, wrote the parliamentary debates. He told me himself that he was not the sole composer of them for those 3 years only. He was not, however, precisely exact in his statement, which he mentioned from hasty recollection. For it is sufficiently evident that his composition of them began November 19, 1740, and ended February 23, 1742 to 1743. It appears from some of Cave's letters to Miss Dr. Birch that Cave had better assistance for that branch of this magazine than has been generally supposed, and that he was indefatigable, that's a word I cannot pronounce, I'm sorry. You know what I mean, though. In getting it made as perfect as he could. Thus, 21st July, 1735, and I quote, I trouble you with the enclosed before you said you could easily correct. I trouble you with the enclosed because you said you could easily correct what is herein given for Lord C. Id's, name withheld, speech. I beg you will do so as soon as you call for me, because this month is far advanced. And 15th July, 1737. As you remember, the debates so far as to perceive the speeches already printed are not exact, I beg the favor that you will peruse the enclosed, and in the best manner your memory will serve, correct the mistaken passages, or add anything that is omitted. I should be very glad to have something in the Duke of N. Ely's speech, name withheld, which would be particularly of service. Quote again. A gentleman has Lord Balfour's speech to add something to. And July 3rd, 1744. You will see what stupid, low, and abominable stuff is put, I suppose, in another compilation of the same kind, upon your noble and learned friend's character, doubtless Lord Hardwicke, such as I should quite reject and endeavor to do something better towards doing justice to the character. But as I cannot expect to attain my desires in that respect, it would be a great satisfaction to me, as well as an honor to our work, to have the favor of the genuine speech. It is a method that several have been pleased to take, and as I could show, but I think myself under a restraint. I shall say so far, that I have had some by a third hand, which I understood well enough to come from the first. Others by penny post, and others by the speakers themselves, who have been pleased to visit St. John's Gate and show particular marks of their being pleased. That's from Birch's Manuscripts in the British Museum, 4302. So that was Cave writing to Dr. Birch. There is no reason, I believe, to doubt the veracity of Cave. It is, however, remarkable that none of these letters are in the years during which Johnson alone furnished the debates, and one of them is in the very year after he ceased from this labor. Johnson told me that as soon as he found that the speeches were thought genuine, he determined that he would write no more of them, for he would not be accessory to the propagation of falsehood. And such was the tenderness of his conscience that a short time before his death he expressed a regret for his having been the author of fictions which had passed for realities. Kind of like a really boring War of the Worlds. He nevertheless agreed with me in thinking that the debates which he had framed were to be valued as orations, or I guess the Onion maybe, upon questions of public importance. They have accordingly been collected in volumes, properly arranged, and recommended to the notice of parliamentary speakers by a preface, written by no inferior hand. I am assured that the editor is Mr. George Chalmers, whose commercial works are well known and esteemed. I must, however, observe that although there is in those debates a wonderful store of political information and very powerful eloquence, I cannot agree that they exhibit the manner of each particular speaker, as Sir John Hawkins seems to think. But indeed, what opinion can we have on his judgment and taste in public speaking, who presumes to give, as the characteristics of two celebrated orators, the deep-mouthed rancor of Pulteney and the yelping pertinacity of Pitt. That's from Hawkins's Life of Johnson, page 100. A rival biography. Anyway, this year, I find that his tragedy of Irene had been for some time ready for the stage. This is Johnson's Irene. And that his necessities made him desirous of getting as much as he could for it without delay. For there is the following letter from Mr. Cave to Dr. Birch in the same volumes of manuscripts in the British Museum, from which I copied those above quoted. They were most obligingly pointed out to me by Sir William Musgrave, one of the curators of that noble repository. September 9th, 1741. I have put Mr. Johnson's play into Mr. Gray, a bookseller of London's, hands, in order to sell it to him if he is inclined to buy it. But I doubt whether he will or not. He would dispose of the copy, and whatever advantage may be made by acting it. Would your society, or any gentleman or body of men that you know, take such a bargain? Footnote here. Not the Royal Society, but the Society for the Encouragement of Learning, of which Dr. Birch was a leading member. Their object was to assist authors in printing expensive works. It existed from about 1735 to 1746, when, having incurred a considerable debt, it was dissolved. Back to the letter. He and I are very fit to deal with theatrical persons. Fleetwood was to have acted in it last season, but Johnson's diffidence or something prevented it. There is no erasure here, but a mere blank to fill up, which may be an exercise for ingenious conjecture. Wow, it's like an ad lib, a Johnson ad lib. Oh, we're at 20 minutes. Good enough. Well, maybe fill up that blank ad-lib in your spare time. Johnson ad-lib. I'll read it again. He and I are very unfit to deal with theatrical persons. Fleetwood was to have acted it last season, but Johnson's diffidence, or, fill in your own word, prevented it. Obstinance, perhaps? Oh, the possibilities are endless. Anyway, until next time, see you in Boswell. Bye from Boswell.